and thirdly, promoting a social type of dwelling. These three acts are related with a new order of and the new global conception. I'm referring to the territorial coordination guideline plans. We contemplate the evolution of the territory in terms of the best use for our citizens. This is the course that we have selected so as to make compatible order in the territory with effectiveness and justice, the well-being of all with rapid administration and action by persons and private groups, local administrations and the state administration. We believe that centralized planning without a voice for the people is inadequate in our country, and so is static planning, which is always overtaken by events, apart from the fact that in both cases political or technical authoritarianism might rise, ignoring the rights of citizens. We also coordinate this with the industrial plants available. The demand for land for these purposes in an amount greater than the supply leads to speculation. The land has certain characteristics, but it is one of our goods, the availability of which is limited, which has a price which must change financially in terms of its functions. But it should in no case be speculative, because that would be unfair, nor anarchic, because that would lead to a deterioration in the operation of the price system. The correction factor has been important, so much so that we can calculate that by the end of 1978, the market for the transfer of lands will have sufficient balance so as to be socially just. In my country, more than 20% of the population live in one of the 6 major human settlements with the typical problems of these growing agglomerations. In contrast, we have rural areas in a situation of partial abandonment of dwellings. Recent evaluations enable us to say that less than 20% of Spanish families with the lowest income are not able to accede to the normal housing market. It is a policy of the government, because of social justice, to give these families access to housing which they will need and which will be identical to the ones now being occupied by families with incomes that are higher than theirs and acquired in the free market. Our plans are stated in our national plans, and these are available to all members of the conference. I thank in advance all those delegates who assist us in moving forward with these items, which I consider to be particularly importance. Together with my desire to achieve progress in these aspects and other aspects which will no doubt be suggested by other countries, I should like to make an offer to those nations who might be interested in the experiences of my country in these fields. We have an enormous desire to work jointly with you, and we hope to achieve greater international cooperation, which will continue constantly after this conference, with our plans for action and programs which will lead us to tangible results within a scale of priorities. Cooperation with Latin America can be a concrete task. And my country is particularly linked to Latin America because it is particularly easy for us for reasons of language or culture. We wish to have an exchange with these sister nations. Because of the diversity of our territorial situations, we have a wealth of solutions, some of which are very likely useful for equivalent situations in the same framework. We are furthermore interested in any actions, programs, and studies regarding the Mediterranean ecosystem, tasks of international cooperation in which we shall cooperate as in the future as we have done in the past. I close my statement, Mr. President, by thanking Canada for the welcome, and I congratulate your government and your delegation for the enormous efforts you have made for holding this conference. Thank you, sir.
I wish to thank the Minister of Housing of Spain, and I now give the floor to the Federal Minister of Health and Environmental Protection of Austria, Her Excellency Dr. Ingrid Leodolter.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Human settlements are a fundamental factor of our environment. Human settlements and its close links with the world of work, social security institutions, and with leisure determine to a large extent the quality of our life. I'm convinced that we all sincerely wish to see translated into reality the knowledge which has been acquired during the preparation for our conference. We are all going to work at this task. We are aware of the imbalance which affects population
Test 1 2 1
at the national and the world levels. This disparity is a major question, and at the same time it lies at the root of many other problems. It is one of the most thorny problems which various governments and the international community must solve. The distribution of population in town and country is also out of proportion and balance. We must make an effort to harmonize these different vital areas. The impetus provided by habitat must lead to a greater international justice as between developing countries and the industrialized world, so that the rich do not become richer and the poor poorer. The policy of the environment and of human settlements on the one hand, and the policy of development on the other, must not come into conflict. From this standpoint, permit me to say a few words about Austria, the country which I have the honor to represent here in my capacity as Federal Minister for Health and Environmental Protection. This country, in which the municipality of Vienna translated into reality more than 50 years ago for the first time, and in a very generous manner, the idea that the building of housing is part of social development. It's not only against the background of slums and shanty towns that human settlements in Austria stand out, for they do not seem to present any major problem. The population of Austria is stable, and living space per person is increasing, and migration is limited. However, the exodus from the country is leading to an urban agglomeration and thus to a partial breakdown of important rural infrastructures. The exodus from the country also causes, especially in the alpine regions, a reduction which is sometimes brutal of peasant activity. The transformation which have taken place in mountainous areas show ever more clearly the importance of our peasants in the protection of the countryside. This is why the Federal Austrian government launched a special program of assistance to mountain dwellers, which provides for direct financial assistance, the total of which is determined by altitude. The objective of Austrian policy with regard to the development of the country is to protect the vital regions and at the same time to encourage the development of disadvantaged areas. The prevention of unemployment is one of the major concerns of the Federal Austrian government. In our view, not to use the available manpower constitutes the greatest economic wastage. Human settlements offer an excellent example, since the building industry is an economic indicator which has a key function: to build housing and to guarantee jobs. Furthermore, we must establish new technologies, create new products and new habits in order to protect man's natural space. This applies in particular to the large towns which suffer from noise and pollution due to traffic and industries. We cannot accept towns conceived only on the basis of economic considerations, and which lack parks, cafes, areas for pedestrians and playgrounds for children. Towns must go beyond the stage of being based merely on economic data. Development of areas close or far, public parks and gardens open for children, and the decongestion of traffic and the creation of areas of reduced traffic and areas for pedestrians will help to make towns more pleasant and to restore their human face. In recent years, Austria has already done a great deal in this field, both in the sector of new technology, which is designed to protect raw material resources and to reduce the production of waste and harm to the environment. Austria has established interesting technology. I'm thinking, for example, of the industrial production of plants, which makes it possible, by use of compost from town waste, to recultivate arid areas. In our view, this system might also contribute to an extension of agricultural production in the countries which suffer from drought. I'm also thinking of inter-community unions for food and drinking water and for the reuse of industrial wastes. It's not without reason that Austria chose the equality of opportunity as a topic for its audiovisual contribution. The film shows clearly that the sharing of opportunities is finally a political decision, and that equality of opportunity and the search for the greatest profit are mutually exclusive. It's important to protect by an appropriate redistribution, that's by refusing just to maximize profits, social structures capable of functioning, still without compromising the profitability of investments. In recent years, Austria has undertaken a number of projects to improve the situation of the rural population, which is disadvantaged. Extending social security, free transport and free school books for all pupils, preventive medical examinations, free for everyone, improvement of the medical service by means of mother and child services, which guarantees every pregnant woman and every children, whether they live in the town or in the mountains, they met the same program of medical examinations established by the Ministry of Health. During the same period, since the establishment of the Ministry of Health in Austria, we have reduced infant mortality by 26%. I'm not bringing up this subject merely to illustrate a medical success, but because the analysis is particularly clear in two provinces which present a dominantly rural structure, Burgenland and Upper Austria. This indeed proves that the problems of public health and their solutions must and can be adapted to different conditions of human settlement. We must also make an effort to adapt our hospitals and medical services to the geographical data, which are often very different. Here too, in order to guarantee equality of opportunity for people in underpopulated areas, and in order to put an end to the exodus from the country, the Austrian policy is also determined as an objective not only of the building of appropriate housing and infrastructures. This is to say that it's not only concerned with extending the towns, but also with protecting the villages and revitalizing them. In this field, specifically, Austria, with its rich cultural heritage and its architectural heritage, has a special mission to accomplish. The protection of monuments and historical sites and the protection of cities have been intensified in recent years by means of many laws and by the support given to public powers, as well as by the commitment of the mass media and to the constant and increasing understanding of the whole population. Thus, it's been possible to conserve historical sites which produce a contrast with the uniform and shapeless cosmopolitanism of modern buildings which are purely functional. If during this statement I've stressed the experience and policy of my country, it was in order to put before you some ideas. The usefulness, perhaps, is not limited to a single country. It's become almost mundane in this context to speak of interdependence. However, social development of the peoples of the world is more indivisible today than ever before in the history of the world. And Habitat is no exception to this rule. We must unite our efforts at the national and international levels to contribute through an exchange of experience and technologies while respecting the individuality of countries and regions to provide human settlements worthy of man. Permit me, Mr. President, the last word concerning the problem of the follow-up for United Nations activities in this field. We think it is necessary to consider in depth and to discuss in detail all the aspects of the question before a final decision is taken. During this debate, the conference will have to make recommendations on certain problems of an administrative and institutional nature. In this context, we sincerely believe that the questions of social and human development are of special importance and that no effort should be spared in coordinating in an effective and economical manner all the relevant activities of the United Nations in this field. Thank you, Mr. President.
Ministre fédéral de la Santé publique et de la Protection.
I thank the Minister for Public Health and Environmental Protection of Austria for her kind words. The next speaker is the Minister for the Environment, Land and Forests of New Zealand, and I give him the floor.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, might I, on behalf of the New Zealand delegation, congratulate all responsible for the splendid arrangements made for this conference. My colleagues and I come to this conference fully aware of New Zealand's relatively fortunate position, seen in the perspective of the world's human settlements crisis. Fortunate in terms of our temperate climate, our youthfulness as a nation, and the readiness of our settlers to work and adapt to the conditions they've found in their country. My countrymen cannot help but be staggered by the magnitude of the problems confronting most of mankind. The statistics are awesome, and there is no need for me to recite the facts and figures and their obvious implications for humanity. Clearly, it is the urgency of the message and our realization of the need to find solutions that have brought us together at this conference. My country is, of course, in a geographical sense, still relatively isolated. In an age that demands increasing interdependence, close international understanding, and an ability to share in the appreciation of global problems, New Zealand's position in the South Pacific could tend to induce a certain apathy or psychological indifference towards the profound problems that exist in the world today. Yet we recognize that the questions of human settlement are of critical importance and cannot be divorced from the wider context of such other major world problems associated with population, with employment, with the production of food, with the environment, and with the full participation by both men and women in the economic, social, and political life and development of their communities. In the past 5 years, these questions have been the subject of major international meetings. Habitat marks a further important milestone in the series of attempts to overcome these great problems and create a better social and economic world order. Each country has its own characteristics, its own pace and history of development. New Zealand, in its isolated geographical situation, was probably amongst the most recent parts of the world to be settled by man. New Zealand's first settlers were Polynesian migrants from the Pacific Islands to our north, more specifically known in our country today as the Maori. The descendants of those early Polynesians who sailed from their legendary island home, Hawaii, were later joined by a second, larger, and more recent European migration during the 19th century. New Zealand is therefore essentially a country built up by immigrants. Today, New Zealand attracts a continuing flow of immigrants, including a strong Polynesian element. In fact, it is not generally known that our biggest city, Auckland, has the largest Polynesian population of any city in the world. Our multiracial society has thus sprung from people who, for a variety of reasons, have wanted a new life in a new setting. They came to a new country, which they found offered them a challenging and far from easy environment. New Zealanders have had to overcome many difficulties in developing their resources, using and adapting the skills they brought with them to create the complex modern society in which they now live. It is the unique blending of the cultures of our Maori, European, and more recent Polynesian migrants that gives New Zealand communities a special character. However, in common with the trend being experienced throughout the world, the majority of our people, 75% in fact, live in towns and in cities. The continuing urban migration creates serious social and economic problems. At the same time, however, successive governments have endeavoured to ensure that for those people who live in the rural areas, the degree of disadvantage is kept to a minimum. While urban growth produces pressures on education, on health, and transportation services, the effects on land use are especially critical. No other developed country is so economically dependent on agricultural production as is New Zealand. But highly productive farmland is in short supply in our mountainous country. Although there is a large area of pastoral land, only 3% of our countryside can be described as first-class farmland suitable for intensive food production. The expansion of our main towns poses a real threat to this vitally important but limited asset. To make the best use of our most productive land, we have recognized the need to plan for and manage urban growth. Land use planning is a mandatory responsibility of local government, and national legislation requires the protection and the preservation of productive farmland. We are thus facing up to our problems, but we appreciate that it may be unwise to draw too close a parallel with the experiences of other countries having much larger populations and being at a different stage of development. There are, however, some experiences to be shared and some lessons to be learnt. The realization of this is, we believe, one of the major benefits to accrue from this conference. In this regard, we are particularly interested in the innovation of the audio-visual program at this conference, and will be watching this experiment carefully to see what value it offers as a means of exchanging ideas. The guidelines we were invited to follow in preparing New Zealand's national report for this conference were designed to highlight an aspect of national development which has contributed towards a good standard of housing and settlement planning. The main theme of the New Zealand report, which all delegations will be receiving, is to stress the use of timber, a major renewable resource for building purposes. May not be of direct application to other countries, but we offer it as an indication of one way in which New Zealand has been able to deal with demand for homes by building upon such renewable resources. The basis of this industry today in New Zealand is radiata pine, brought also as a migrant from California and selected after initial trials as the principal species for the forestry industry. Through a fortunate combination of climate and management techniques, New Zealand's man-made forests, growing faster than anywhere else in the world, faster even than in their original environment, now serve to provide us with a renewable resource of key importance. When so much concern is being felt about the world supply of resources, we believe that the sustained use of renewable resources is an important principle to establish and uphold. We are confident that our experience in this field has relevance for many countries. The technology of forest management and timber use have indeed come to play a significant part in New Zealand's overseas aid projects. This, sir, might be an appropriate place to refer to the recent achievement of a fellow New Zealander. In this connection, I refer to the success of a young Wellington architect, Ian Athfield, whose work has been recognised through the award of first place in a worldwide competition organised by the International Architectural Foundation, a competition to design a low-cost community housing project within a developing country, in this case, the Philippines. Mr. Athfield's concept emphasizes the role of the community in such a project. Advantage has been taken of this Habitat Conference to exhibit the 3 prize-winning models here in Vancouver. I sincerely hope that delegates will visit the Vancouver Art Gallery to examine these exciting and relevant exhibits. I am gratified that this particular achievement provides an interesting illustration of New Zealand's continuing involvement in the Asian and Pacific regions. Time does not permit me to expand on the important themes of planning and public participation, as referred to in our national report. But I am sure that suitable opportunities of doing so will arise in the committees. Before concluding, however, I would like to emphasize one point to which New Zealand attaches great importance. This is the idea of regional cooperation. We therefore welcome the emphasis in the documents before us of principles of regional collaboration, and we support the notion that programs for international action arising from this conference should be structured in a regional form. While making this point, we feel bound to stress that even the best conceived regional schemes will come to nothing unless there is a wholehearted national commitment to the proposals and the ideas hammered out at this conference. Deeds must accompany intent, for we misuse effort if we either dwell on the injustices of the past or languish amid the dreams of the future. We want a world where progress means advancement, not merely change, where hope leads to fulfillment, not despair, where concern for mankind's future is universal, remembering always that more noble ideals have been smothered by apathy than ever founded in the seas of adversity.
I wish to thank the Minister of Environment, Lands and Forests of New Zealand. I would now like to give the floor to the Minister of State, Director General of the National Land Agency of Japan, His Excellency Mr. Shin Kanemaru.
Mr. President, on behalf of the Japanese delegation, I should like, first of all, to extend my heartfelt congratulations to you, sir, on your unanimous election to the high office of President of this historic conference, and to express my firm conviction that under your outstanding and impartial leadership, the present conference will yield fruitful results. Our delegation is determined to give you the fullest possible cooperation and every possible assistance in the discharging of your very important duties. I should also like to express my sincere gratitude to the government and people of Canada for all they have done in hosting the present United Nations conference. I also pay the highest tribute to the Secretary General, Enrique Peñalosa, and the members of his staff for their untiring efforts in the long period of the preparatory work, during which they always kept in mind the spirit and recommendations of the Stockholm Conference. Mr. President, the problem of human settlements as it appears in the world today is characterized by the explosive increase in population, its rapid concentration in cities, and the simultaneous occurrence of depopulation of rural areas caused by the outflow of population to the cities, both of which are contributing to the deterioration of our living environment. In order to combat this situation, we must strengthen our resolve and increase our efforts to improve our living environment and the quality of life, utilizing all our wisdom and imagination. I believe that the need for the development of a safer and more comfortable living environment is closely linked to the question of assuring human dignity and, as such, should be accorded the highest priority in national policies and administrative measures. Moreover, human settlement problems are extremely diverse, consisting, as they do, of various economic, social, and cultural components, which makes necessary the formulation of comprehensive and systematic policies and strategies for their solution, and a firm political commitment by the whole international community to meet such an enormous challenge. I'm confident that our efforts and achievements in the area of improvement of the quality of human life will, in the end, contribute to making world peace a reality, which is the common desire of all mankind, and that this is the fundamental objective of the present conference. Mr. President, in the narrow land of Japan, an area of 370,000 square kilometers, there now live more than 110 million people, and the total population will, it's estimated, be more than 130 million in the year 2000. Moreover, in the Japanese islands, where the land is mostly mountainous and the plains and other flat areas suitable for human habitation and economic activities account for less than 30% of the total land area, the population density in the areas suitable for habitation is slightly over 900 per square kilometer, one of the highest in the world. In addition, our country, poorly endowed with natural resources, has been largely dependent on processing and trade for its economic development and, as a result, has concentrated most of its industrial activities in the coastal areas. It is under these conditions that Japan has achieved a high level of economic growth since the latter half of the 1950s. In the course of this economic growth, population tended to concentrate in urban areas to a degree hardly seen before in the history of mankind. In the Tokyo metropolitan area, for example, 27 million people, 24% of the nation's total population, are living within an area of only 13,000 square kilometers, 3.6% of the country's total land area. The concentration and growth of population and industry in the large city areas, because of the advantages of centralization, has given rise, on the one hand, to the various ill effects of high-density industrial society, such as environmental pollution, and has, on the other, brought about the outflow of population from rural villages, which are now, as a result, finding it difficult to maintain the local community's functions. Thus, in Japan, as in other countries, human settlement problems are an important matter requiring urgent solution. In recent years, it is country-widely recognized among the Japanese people that economic growth does not of itself guarantee the improvement of the people's welfare. In the light of this, the government of Japan has formulated a new economic plan aimed at shifting the emphasis in economic policies from economic growth in the sense of quantitative expansion to the qualitative improvement of the people's lives. Further, the government established the National Land Agency in 1974, entrusting it with the task of developing in a comprehensive way programs and policies on the use of land. Since its establishment, the agency, in cooperation with other ministries and agencies concerned, has been taking positive policy measures relating to a variety of human settlement problems, such as overpopulation in the large cities, depopulation in rural areas, regional development, land problems, and the development of water resources. Solutions to human settlement problems must be sought on the basis of comprehensive plans for the development and utilization of the nation's total land area. In Japan, the government has implemented various plans to attain these purposes and is now in the process of formulating a new comprehensive national development plan for a 10-year period starting in 1976, taking due account of the recent major changes in the world economic situation. This national plan is being worked out in full recognition of the limits to the land and natural resources available in our country, and has as its prime objective the systematic consolidation and building of a stable, healthy and cultivated environment for human settlement, based on each area's historical and traditional culture, harmonized with the natural features of the regions and giving due consideration to regional characteristics. In this regard, the government announced last December a proposed ideal pattern of the distribution of population, aiming at curbing the concentration of population in the large cities and encouraging rural development. The major undertakings relevant to achieving this fundamental goal are expected to include conservation of the natural environment and historical assets, the protection of the nation's land from disasters, appropriate uses of land, water and other resources, improvement of housing and other facilities related to people's lives, ensuring a stable supply of food and energy, consolidation of the overall transportation and communication networks, improved allocation of educational, cultural, medical and other facilities, and the redistribution of industries. Mr. President, I believe human settlement problems are to be solved primarily by the national efforts of each country. However, together we have the wisdom to carve out the path to our future and possess valuable assets, the experience which all mankind has drawn from its long history of coping with settlement problems. It's my firm belief that if all of us share these assets, we can make a substantial contribution to the eradication of these problems. I venture to say that the historic significance of habitat lies in the fact that we have come to realize the need for considering human settlement problems in an international perspective, regarding these problems as the concern of the whole of humanity rather than as national issues, as they were hitherto considered to be, and the need for support in the form of international cooperation for the self-help efforts of these states to solve these problems. The government of Japan gives its active support to the objectives of this conference, which, in its view, is basically in line with its own policy direction and position. It is the earnest hope of our delegation that the present conference may adopt by consensus a declaration of principles providing the general guidelines for the solution of human settlement problems and also recommendations for national action which each state should bear in mind when carrying out human settlement policies in individual countries, taking into account the different circumstances of each country. I now turn to the question of the institutional arrangements within the United Nations system relating to human settlements. I believe it important that the present conference should consider some forms of institutional arrangements for the purpose of making effective use of the momentum generated at the present conference for coping with human settlement problems and of implementing steadily the recommendations which will, I hope, be adopted by consensus. However, matters relating to institutional arrangements should be considered in such a manner as to assure the efficient operation of the whole United Nations system and to avoid institutional proliferation in line with the general objectives of the restructuring of the economic and social sectors of the United Nations system. Further, in view of the close interrelationship between human settlements and economic and social development, we should keep fully in mind when discussing institutional arrangements the need for assuring adequate linkage with the existing development assistance agencies in order to make effective use of their resources and experience. As I mentioned earlier, human settlement problems are basically national in nature. Nevertheless, there exists not a few problems common to countries in each region, and it's precisely here that regional activities relating to human settlements can and should play an active role through intensified cooperation efforts at regional levels, particularly the active and effective use of United Nations Regional Economic Commissions and other UN institutions for regional development, training and other related functions. It is in this spirit that the government of Japan intends to continue to cooperate, as in the past, in strengthening and expanding the activities of the United Nations Regional Development Center in Nagoya. And I also wish to propose in this connection that the United Nations University, which has its headquarters in Tokyo, make full use of the results of this conference in considering human and social development, one of its themes for priority study. As regards the content of programs for international cooperation in the field of human settlements, the Japanese delegation very much hopes that constructive programs based on the spirit of cooperation in harmony with self-help will be adopted with the full consent of all participating countries. It is the intention of the government of Japan to extend the fullest possible cooperation in the task of implementing conclusions thus adopted. I should like to draw your attention to the fact that Japan has been vigorously pushing forward assistance activities, such as aid to support national programs for the improvement of infrastructure, and to provide officials and experts with training programs for the benefit of developing countries. The government intends to continue these efforts untiringly in the years to come. Furthermore, we hope that the World Bank, United Nations Development Programme and other international assistance agencies will strengthen their activities in the field of human settlements in the light of fresh insight, thus helping realise steadily the aspirations of all nations expressed in the documents that the present conference may adopt. Mr. President, Habitat is the first international conference ever held to enable mankind to seek solutions to human settlement problems on a global scale and from a comprehensive point of view. In Japan, as in many other countries, momentum for solutions to these problems has been built up through such events as the pre-Habitat Nagoya Meeting on Human Settlements, the Higoya Conference on International Federation of Housing and Planning, and the World Environment Exposition.
The Minister of State, Director General of the National Land Agency of Japan. Before calling on the next speaker, I should like to point out that it's quite understood if members of delegations would wish to omit references, congratulations to myself or the Secretary General or the host country, so they can deal with the substance and the time they have available to them.
The Japanese archipelago, with a total area of 370,000 square kilometers and inhabited by over 110 million people. For the 3 post-war decades, the economic and social structures in Japan have been geared to industrial expansion. and this has brought about concentration of both population and industries in the major cities. Sprawling towns, a housing shortage, traffic congestion, air pollution. Overpopulation gives rise to malfunctioning of the urban mechanism and deterioration of the living environment. How can the population and industries in major cities be dispersed and decentralized to other parts of the country? This is a fundamental question common to both town planning and land planning in Japan. There is a development plan for the capital region based upon the principle of planned relocation centering on some of the functions of a built-up area. There is also a comprehensive national development plan which aims to obtain balanced distribution of population and industries in the country. The plan involves large-scale development projects throughout the country, along with expansion of transportation and communications networks. There are already signs of population increase in some local cities, but they are by no means strong enough to suggest any significant reduction in the excessively high concentration of population and industries in major cities. In these circumstances, policies for new land planning are being formulated, which give priority to securing a good living environment.
Thank you very much.
I wish to thank the Minister of State once more from the Director General of the National Land Agency of Japan. The next speaker is the Governor of the Federal District of Caracas, Venezuela, His Excellency Mr. Diego Aria, to whom I now give the floor.
Señor Presidente, señor...
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, we are aware that human settlements are not the result of chance. So we have come to Canada, this meeting of international solidarity, knowing that Vancouver gives us a unique opportunity to make consciousness sensitive and radical throughout the world, so that the defeated urban dweller and the desperate rural dweller may enjoy justice and the right to access to dignity. Distinguished delegates, the first Inca said, "In this valley, our father the sun commanded that we halt and build our homes so that his will be done." Thus it was that Manco Cápac chose Cusco, the capital of the empire, and thus started a process of human settlements which was expressed not only by the beauty of the city, but mainly because of an ecological concept using to the utmost all the technological opportunities of the times. In fact, the Incas, the Mayas, and Aztecs created artificial ecosystems which profoundly altered a natural environment which had been basically poor. The 4 years subsequent to the conquest witnessed the establishment of a new process which gave rise to a lengthy period of environmental deterioration, which increased because of the force of exogenous factors. The relationship between habitat and development leads to two extreme positions, but it would be unrealistic to suppose that we can go back to the historical isolation in which primitive cultures developed. Obviously, there is no room for cultural or political islands. It is essential that there be self-determination and self-confidence to reaffirm one's own values, without which we could not arrive at a really shared culture. It is essential to understand that what is ecumenical is not a repetition of a given lifestyle in any ecological or cultural circumstance, but respect and coexistence of all expressions of the peoples of the world. Nor is it possible to think that development is governed by a single formula where the poor countries are at the starting point of the same course as that followed by the industrialized countries. Development is far more a process of cultural and economic independence rather than the incorporation of the so-called less developed countries within a hegemonous universal system. The right to self-determination and seeking your own values, gradually substituting a kind of industrialist determinism which would lead to the adoption of a universal lifestyle, access to which is restricted by a high GNP. Self-affirmation, which is the basic component of this new form of development, is claimed by the third world and requires the consolidation of the socio-cultural identity of emerging societies, and this identity can be expressed perhaps far better than any other way by the integration of the man with his environment. Present development based on the import of capital and technology are inevitably associated with the imposition of alien lifestyles, which, apart from not being adjusted to the environmental conditions, have a strong inhibitive effect on the creative ability which exists in every people. Clearly, a habitat which is both a form of liberation and expression of cultural and ecological realities can only be achieved by respecting the standards of living of each society. Further, it would be physically impossible if the present concepts and rules are applied to give, for example, infrastructure and services to the 12 million beings which are daily added to the urban areas in Latin America, which are added every year. To change these concepts and rules of necessity requires a major creative and organizational effort, without which it would not be possible to halt the growing deterioration of our human settlements, or far less create a satisfactory habitat for a population which will triple in 25 years. The existing conditions in the non-industrialized regions of the world make it possible to achieve a more efficient habitat than the one that has resulted from imitating alien lifestyles and the application of imported technologies. The environmental conditions typical of the developing countries offer conditions favorable for economic and solutions which are socially efficient. In these same regions, there is a vast creative potential which is manifest, and as Prime Minister Trudeau said yesterday, there is a creative capacity among the young who have managed not to yield to compromise or indifference with which the problem of human settlements are faced. What is fundamental is the political action. The problems of habitat go beyond mere material questions. For the most of the population of the third world, to live with dignity seems to have become an impossible goal. To bring about joy of living within everybody's reach, to put an end to pure water, air, and services being luxury goods are fundamental tasks required in a new international economic order. Within this concept, the President of Venezuela, Carlos Andrés Pérez, has maintained that the fundamental problem of human settlements and poverty is the indifference of the large nations in understanding their responsibility for all the developing countries, and that is precisely why we're struggling to promote a new order whose acceptance by all representatives in an act of sincerity for the human right of all men to live in dignity is required. We shall, besides ordering space, we must order time. Despair has its limits. Every day is a tragedy for millions who can no longer postpone a solution to their feelings of frustration, resentment, and anxiety. Mass communication media further dramatize the contrast between poverty of the majority and the opulence of a privileged minority and the waste in the wealthy societies. We cannot afford the luxury of losing more time in discussions among various jurisdictions and institutions. or ideologies. We need large-scale action unless the crisis is to overwhelm us and solutions are to come too late. It is not a question of putting a roof on poverty nor storing human beings. It is a matter of satisfying their real needs in an integral fashion. To create the future is, as Saint-Exupéry said, first and foremost to think in the present. We must convince those who do not believe in international cooperation, who see in world conferences a mere action of declaration. We must urgently execute projects which commit our present to the service of the future. The urgency is not the exclusive domain of some countries or peoples. The emergency is universal. The poor countries have no monopoly on poverty. Large enclaves of poverty still subsist in many highly developed countries, and this fact should lead to a joint solidarity and political will. No country can today live in isolation from the pain, the concern, and the hopes of others. This conference is manifest proof of this new reality which binds us, overflowing frontiers and ideologies, the link being to bring dignity to and rescue man and his environment. Nor can we forget that besides human settlements, the atomic bomb and other sophisticated weaponry, with all the money needed for ballistic missiles to transport to the so-called enemy, every minute drain investments in the millions, thus lessening the means of salvation for human being in our urban centers, our verdant areas, our rivers and fields. In the world where everything affects all others, we cannot forget that a fundamental objective in improving human settlements is to seek peace and disarmament. On the one hand, we have stored an unimaginable collective power of destruction, and behind the facades of the slums, an unsustainable individual power of destruction. When the finite resources become less, we shall be convinced that the reduction of the inventory of our poverty will go hand in hand with the reduction of the inventory of our weapons. This truth is so elementary that I'm almost ashamed to repeat it, as though this were inevitable. Our forebears buried without a thought civilizations and cultures such as the glorious ones of the Incas, the Mayas, and the Aztecs. But now it will no longer be the majestic territory of the Incas or of the Aztecs which we would destroy, but simply the modest empire of each person and his possibilities for happiness which are eroding. An old person in the twilight of his life defenseless sees the calm of his environment vanish. The young man without responsible family surroundings is belligerent and alien in a hostile world where he finds no answers to his concerns and needs. These subjects will not be the subject of books, as happened with the destruction of our major civilizations, because their humble sentimental empires are destroyed with leaving no trace. But what stands fast is the greatest challenge of our times. For the wealthier countries, doing away with the undesirable effects of industrialization, and for the emerging countries, building a modern civilization where habitat will be an instrument in the expression of the will to self-affirmation based on satisfying all human values and not only generating material wealth. I should like to leave with you the anxiety of our poet, Andrés Eloy Blanco, who expressed his concern for the problems of man and his environment. He said, I quote, what peoples want is that the force of humanity have as an indispensable condition the humaneness of force. What peoples want is that the land be given to a sower of seeds, and to the sower the land he needs. What peoples want is security for the land where he builds his precarious home and uncertain hope. What peoples want is that their bread be as large as their hunger and their government have the shape of justice. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the governor of the Federal District of Caracas, Venezuela, and also wish him well in his responsibilities as chairman of our committee number 3. Before calling on the next speaker, I would like to remind the participants once again that in accordance with the decision of the conference, the list of speakers in the general debate will be closed at 6 p.m. today. Those wishing to participate but who have not inscribed themselves on the list are requested to do so as soon as possible. I now give the floor to the Vice Minister, the Federal Ministry of Technical Development and Investment of Czechoslovakia, His Excellency Mr. Pavel Majerski.
Monsieur le Président, Messieurs les délégués.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, permit me to express on behalf of the Czechoslovak government our warm appreciation of the initiative of the United Nations in convening this conference, which will contribute to the solution of the problems of human settlements and which will make it possible to strengthen and deepen peaceful relations among nations. We're fully aware from the outset that we must not prolong forever our theoretical discussions, but we must seek practical programs for the solution of problems of human settlements in the urban residential areas, especially in the developing countries, where the situation is the most serious. Because we must not repeat. We have only to look at past experience and to be familiar with the best principles for development that we can do this while still respecting the national customs of the country concerned. For the experience of Europe cannot be transferred to other countries without respect for their culture. Czechoslovakia, together with the other socialist countries, is one of the countries in which there is a systematic policy for the development of residential areas with a view to preventing what is called the global development problem of residential areas and to introduce development in the national economy designed to improve the living conditions of the whole population. We don't intend in our audiovisual presentation to go into the details of building techniques, but we have tried to show typical models for the solution for the building and rebuilding of residential areas